Welcome to Inspirational Transformational TV show. Amy Whitney here today with my special guest, Shantree Kacera. Shantree is a visionary. Right from, I suppose in his teen years, Shantree knew what he wanted to do with his life, and he's followed that path. Shantree has created 50 acres of paradise just outside London, Ontario. It's an eco-spiritual educational centre that has permaculture, forest gardening, and the most beautiful feel of any space I have probably been in my life. Shantree is a medicinal shamanic herbalist. He's an iridologist. He practices Ayurvedic live food nutrition. And in the interview today, he touches on all of those aspects. It's an absolute joy and pleasure to introduce Shantree to you. Enjoy the show. Shantree, thank you so much for joining Inspirational Transformational TV show.
Great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Now, you're the founder of the Living Centre located in London, Ontario. You've started this centre in 1993.
83.
83, sorry.
28 years.
Wow, no wonder it's so lush. What was the inspiration to start this centre? Where were you at that point in your life?
I grew up in Yugoslavia. I lived in London. I think when I was 15 years old, I said I want to live in the country. Mm-hmm. And my parents said, "No, you won't like it out there." So I said, "Okay, well, I'm going to start saving all my nickels and dimes and pennies and dreaming of being in the country." And so in '93, this land just happened to be available. It's been organic since the beginning of time. I've met all three owners who've been here before. The house and the barn and some of the buildings that are on the property were built 1912, 1914. And all three families, nobody had used chemicals. So the family that I bought it from were from Holland, and they lived here from 1950 to '83. And their youngest son wanted to have the place to have a tree nursery. Mm-hmm. And he had a car accident, and he was paralyzed from the waist down. Mm-hmm. So for 3 years, nobody did anything on the property. Nobody tended to the land, so when I saw it, it was totally quite run down. Mm-hmm. It was more like a hobby farm. Mm-hmm. And so when I moved here, there was actually almost no trees on the property. It was just like this house with that tree and a few cherry trees at the front, and the big maple tree up front, but besides that, this direction, there was nothing. So we planted well over 1,000 trees on the property now, medicinal, edible, fruit trees, nut trees, grapes, figs, all the rest. So my thing was just live in the country, be a herbalist, and I didn't know where the money was going to come from. I just knew I had to live in the country.
So it was a calling. It wasn't like you were raised in a farming family, or it was your birth calling. Is that right?
I believe it was, even though I think it's in my blood.
Right.
Like I said, I grew up in Yugoslavia, and we lived in a little tiny village. So when I was growing up, my parents had a huge garden, but my sister and I had only a small area to play in because it was all a necessity. It was survival. Right. They had to grow a lot of their own food, a lot of their own medicine. So that's what I got brought up with. Mm-hmm. But it's also what was happening in Yugoslavia as well. Mm-hmm. And I just loved plants ever since I was as far back as I can remember.
So in '83, when you purchased this land, you weren't a herbalist, because currently now you're a herbalist. Is that correct?
I was studying and becoming a herbalist during the early '80s, '83, '84, and I continued my studies even once I was here and establishing the herb garden and some of them. So
tell us a little bit about the property. It's 50 acres. What have you established here?
Well, 25 acres is a forest. Mm-hmm. About 15 acres, 10 acres is becoming a forest, or has become a woodlot now, because I haven't done anything in 28 years. The other few acres are gradually becoming a forest. So altogether there's about 5 acres that we're tending to, either as a pear orchard. Around the house here, there's probably about 1 to 2 acres around here. There's a pond on the property where we're actually doing a lot of landscaping and a lot of planting of edible plants, and just where the nut trees are. We have a teepee on the property there, which is our sacred space where we do our morning practices there. So there's 5 acres that are all in different stages of development, of restoring the vegetation onto the land, and also bringing in a lot more native plants here, because this is one of the most diverse parts of all Canada. There's over 2,000 plants that thrive here, and what we're doing is discovering what some of their uses are, how to bring them in as medicines or as food. And a lot of these plants are plants you don't find in grocery stores, plants you don't find in health food stores. Plants are becoming rare, forgotten, or actually extinct now. 15 years ago there was 8. Last year there was 95. Now it's 125 plants that are gone.
Really?
We no longer have them here.
As in the Carolinian forest plants?
That's correct.
And you're sourcing out these endangered plants and allowing them to flourish on your land.
That's right. And then discovering how to use them, because if we can teach that to people, how to use some of these plants, then people get excited and want to have them in their gardens. Find that you can make a tea with this, or this provides this medicinal use, or perhaps there's a certain part that could be used as a food, as a spice.
When you say discovering how to use them, are you looking at materia medica, or are you actually trying it and proving it on yourself, or?
I don't quite prove things experimentally on myself unless I'm pretty sure I know what it is, either through colleagues of mine who I know plants, or some of the native culture, the native tradition, native peoples that know some of the plants. So
no experimentation here.
I have a very scientific mind and understanding of how to do that.
Yes.
And bring that forward. And we're bringing them in forward from a raw food perspective.
Yes.
That the cultures that were here before were not doing that. So that's what we're experimenting with, is how to use those plants, how to collect seeds and bring them in and sprout them in the wintertime. For example, take echinacea seeds, take echinacea and have echinacea sprouts for the wintertime, or burdock seed sprouts, or nettle seed sprouts, so that you can actually have wild greens in the kitchen in the wintertime.
How beautiful. So the farming aspect and the growing of herbs, the growing of food is one aspect. What else happens at the Living Center?
We're an educational center. We educate people. We inspire people with seeing another paradigm, another way of living in harmony with nature. So it's people seeing it, as well as coming and being educated. And hopefully, our deepest desire is that we actually activate people to leave here and actually go out and continue that rippling, or that spreading of that there's another way of living compared to what we usually, or what we think of in society today. So education, inspiration, and then activation.
And what sort of people come to the center?
People who have been exploring, perhaps to a certain extent. We have the odd person who is new, but most people have already done a certain amount of exploration and work on it. So it's a wide range from 18-year-old to 89, 90-year-old. So it really varies. Our youngest apprentice last year was 18 years old, and the oldest one was 62 last year. So that's
beautiful.
the range that we had.
Beautiful. Let's go into forest gardening and tell us a little bit about what that is.
Well, the forest gardening is actually my passion right now. All the things that I've learned after all these years as a herbalist, as a gardener, it's taken me to a place of deep understanding of what nature's doing, what ecology is doing. And it's mimicking what a forest does. And a forest does something that's quite amazing. It's actually 97% recycling. And it's regenerating. So when you look at a forest, it's not just sustaining itself. The fertility is increasing. The diversity is increasing. The productivity is increasing with every passing year. The topsoil gets richer and richer. And yet with modern day agriculture, if you don't put anything back on that field, you won't be able to grow anything. And yet in the forest, nobody is putting anything on that soil. Nobody's spreading any kind of fertilizer, any kind of compost in a forest. And yet the topsoil just keeps getting richer and richer and richer. Topsoil used to be 3 to 4 feet, over a meter deep. Now most of us are living on subsoil. Most of our food is coming from subsoil. We're not really living on topsoil anymore because topsoil is just, it's gone. And I've been here for 28 years, like I mentioned, and I see the amount of tons of material that leaves the farms, from my neighbors' farms. Tons, like truckloads. And every spring there's a few powderings, of dustings of fertilizer that goes on, that's it. So when you think of the organic material that's leaving, the little bit of chemicals coming into fertilizer soil is not there. It's not enough to sustain. So what forest gardening is mimicking and learning what nature's doing and following that model so that the whole system becomes regenerative, which means that nothing has to be done anymore except two things: prune and harvest. There's no plowing, there's no disking, there's no rotilling, there's no cultivation of any sort. And most of what we focus on is perennial plants, right, which is another part. Because if you look at most of what most people consume these days, it's annuals. Yes. And yet permaculture, forest gardening, focuses on perennials. Most of our planet, vegetation on the whole planet, is perennials. Mm. But for some reason human beings decide to focus on annuals, which is a lot more work. Because right, you need the power, be it an ox, be it a tractor, be it horsepower, whatever it is, to plow and disc your field. And yet perennials don't need that.
What is permaculture?
There's so many different definitions to it. To me, permaculture is about relationship. It's about relationship with how we interact with our surroundings. It's being bioregional, it's being local, it's being, a lot of times people talk about as being a sustainable way of growing our food, but it goes beyond that. It goes beyond permanent agriculture, which is where the word originally comes from. But I think of it as more permanent culture, human culture, of how's humanity interacting with our natural world. And it's about how to create more of a harmonious relationship with my surroundings, with my environment, with the ecology around me, and learning how to be part of that ecology instead of separate, which is where we are commonly today.
Now, we're commonly in a separate place today, but you're 23 years on the land. Have you seen a shift in people's consciousness with gardening, with growing, with organics? Can you tell us a little bit about where you think society was, say, 23 years ago versus where we're at today with growing?
It's actually 28 years. 28.
I'm not doing well with numbers with you.
In 1983, I'm not sure what the number was, but it was somewhere between 10 to 20 organic farms in Ontario.
10 to 20?
10 to 20 organic farms in Ontario. I'm not sure if we're at 700 or just around 700 right now. We have about 700 organic farms in Ontario. So I've seen that happen. And when I first came here, the way I was actually able to make a livelihood is I was growing organic vegetables. I started growing sprouts, put them on my bicycle, biking to London, about a 45-minute bike ride, delivering the sprouts to the different health food stores, but they didn't have a vehicle. They didn't have a car, didn't have a truck, didn't have anything.